Berda, and I'm here to open the third Personal Democracy Forum Central and Eastern Europe talks, which is a replacement for the big conference, but we're very happy that once a month we are meeting with the community of Personal Democracy Forum and just see familiar faces like today already happened. So if you want to show yourself on the video and wave, it's absolutely fine. And how is it going to be? We will have a discussion in the very beginning that will be led by Krzysztof Izdebski, who is the policy director of a Państwo Foundation. And then there will be, we invite everybody to write in the chat throughout the discussion, and then in the end, for a half an hour or so, there will be place to verbalize and to take part in audio and video version. The style is as informal as possible because we actually missed the most meetings over a beer or over a coffee, where we try to stay true to each other and really express our feelings or doubts or joys, and we wanted to a bit maybe repeat it. And this time is really almost like we meet face to face, because we timed this session very precisely, because we knew that there is a lot of chance that the European Commission will present the AI regulation. And that's why we wanted to do it just after, like in 24 hours. So the feelings are fresh, the opinions are new. And I want also in the very end thank to National Endowment for Democracy for giving us money to be able still to meet like this. And now I'm passing the voice to Krzysztof Izdebski, who will be leading the discussion.
Thank you so much, Anna. Welcome, everyone. So Anna just described the general flow of the panel, of the discussion, of the whole conversation we're going to have, also including you at the audience. And also we encourage you to post some questions or make remarks in the chat. It's always supporting me a bit as a moderator. In this regard, and I will start with presenting our panelists, and then I will give myself around 4 minutes to make a short introduction, but panelists are most important, and thank to all of you that you find the time, especially to Kevin, who is in California, and I thought he's in Arkansas, and that's a bigger difference in the time. So very appreciated, Kevin, again. But we have with us Vanja Škorić, Senior Legal Advisor at the European Center for Non-for-Profit Law. And my first question, very brief question to you, Vanja, is like, what is your first impression? Just tell me. Of the regulation, of course.
A missed opportunity.
A missed opportunity, okay.
And a slight naive belief in unicorns, and I'll explain on that later.
Okay, already sounds super interesting. Katarzyna Szymielewicz, president of the Panoptykon Foundation. The same question to you, Katarzyna. The first impression.
It's a fake. It's a fake. It's pretending something it's not doing. So in that sense, it's pretty detrimental, sadly.
Okay, it's going to be a tough discussion. We don't have any EC representatives here, but they should listen to it. We're going to send them the video, especially with the first impressions here. And the last but not least, Kevin DeLieben, the Director of Advocacy and Legal Aid of Arkansas, and a rapper, and he's got some AI songs in his career as well. And your first impression, if you had a chance to have one.
I did, Krzysztof. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody for having me. It's underwhelming. It's underwhelming. It feels, as somebody who's fought against algorithmic decision making and won, I was really hoping that this would be something inspirational that we might want to replicate in the US. And I mean, it's got its okay features, but it's very disappointing.
Okay, I see that we already know where the discussion gonna flow, but let me just make a very small introduction also for those that have not had a chance to get this first impression. But before doing that, I also wanna thanks a lot to the European AI Fund that also supports us since the beginning of April, and Państwo Foundation, means us as a Państwo Foundation, also in the terms to bring more knowledge and capacity into our organization, but also to connect the EU policy discussions with CEE, so Central and Eastern European countries that are not members of the European Union, and we are sharing the same problems, because of course the question of artificial intelligence, the question of automated decision-making is transnational. This is also connected with some previous work that we did as a Państwo Foundation together with our partners from the region. We had a chance to make a quite in-depth research on automated decision-making processes in countries in the region, including Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Serbia, Georgia, Kosovo, North Macedonia, and Hungary. So what we discovered there is basically we have a lot of issues already with automated decision making, which is not necessarily a part of using the artificial intelligence features. And this is something that already also is, I mean, I wasn't disappointed in the terms that I knew what the Commission is doing, but still I think we lack of the very needed regulation of etching all the automated decision-making systems, not necessarily the one that use AI. And from the report that from the reports, actually, we had two editions of this, we see that the problems remains basically the same, especially from my perspective, what is interesting, the complete lack of transparency, including one of the cases we also do as a part of our strategic litigation program. We don't even know how much the system that followed the fraud the frauds concerning the COVID recovery, how much did it cost? And what's the name of the system? Not saying how does it work. So these are the very concrete problems of the system that they have the impact on the individuals and societies. Very briefly, I will just make some points what the AI regulation is about. We have a ban on some technologies, for example, the real-time remote biometric identification systems in publicly accessible spaces, We have another category, so we have a ban, we have a ban which is okay. We will explore how okay it is on some technologies. We have a wide peak and vague category of high-risk systems, including the credit scoring, eligibility for social benefits, AI to be used in law enforcement, AI for administration of justice and democratic processes, and many more. But what does it mean? It's a high risk. When it's high risk, there has to be a risk management system. Training validation must be subject to appropriate data governance and management practices. There should be some record keeping, transparency, some provisions for information to users, human oversight, and we have also conformity assessments, which is mostly a self-assessment. Then we'll explore it probably further. And we have another board created, which is an European Artificial Intelligence Board, but also we will have a relevant public bodies in member states. And what is good from my perspective, because also we were pushing very much for this, we have a public registry in the form of the EU database for standalone high-risk AI systems. So this is basically what we have, or actually what is important from my perspective. But the first very opening question is for each of the panelists is like, what I'm missing, what is also important in the regulation that I haven't told about, and you think it's worth to mention, what is missing there? I will see Vanja, please go first.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You stole a couple of my good steps that I don't have to enumerate now. Yes, there are a couple of wins, couple of good steps that we identified as well, and you mentioned it rightly. There's also some reporting requirements included and so on. But maybe just to start with two overarching reminders that are often polarized in the discussions to the extent of mythical developments when we discuss AI. First one, the technology and AI development is not inevitable. So we, the people, choose what will be developed and how, right? So it's not like it's somehow developing itself and we just have to kind of sit and cry watching it. The second is regulation does not stifle innovation. In fact, we can actually propose the opposite, that the regulation can be a stepping stone for innovation, because the lessons from the past and different other industries do show that good regulation does not stop or stifle innovation, which we often hear as an outcry from the business sector. It in fact can drive a more compliant innovation. So the products that are trying to innovate itself to be more compliant and human rights friendly. So with that in mind, several points that are actually missing, that are the missed opportunities. First of all, the Commission in its proposal did recognize some levels of risk of AI system, right? But it's not really clear how it classifies these levels, or what is the actual process of assessing those risks before the classification. It does have an annex of high risk AI systems, but it's very questionable how some systems end up in a high risk category and some don't. For example, they do propose the ban on the remote biometric identification. And mind you, this is the narrower definition than a biometric recognition, because the technology is much wider than the Commission proposes to ban. So the type of biometric recognition in terms of assessing a person's behavior or characteristics that are not necessarily there to identify the person is not placed in the high risk category, but the lower risk category, right? So that requires merely the transparency about its use. In essence, the system needs to notify you that it's using this. But this can also be highly intrusive, and it's also very questionable and dubious in use. For example, AI detecting people's emotions or classifying according to different biometric features, age, race, sexual orientation, so on. So the current classification of the Commission doesn't go far enough to actually protect civic rights and freedoms from the harm. Additionally, worrying is that any ban that exists can be contravened or can be circumvented for using the systems for counterterrorism or the fighting of the serious criminal situations, but then again, the continuation of using this counterterrorism and then economic development as a shield to kind of limit the protection of fundamental rights. This is the discourse we have been seeing in the counterterrorism sphere and securitization sphere that is amplified here as well. So that's really not what we want to see. And another important requirement that is missing, that actually comes from the EU's own ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI, that were adopted a couple of years ago. So that wasn't included in the proposal, is the inclusivity, non-discrimination, and fairness element. This is not explicitly dealt in within the proposal. So the Commission kind of hopes, and this is where the unicorns come in, and it hopes that the high quality data that they will require will somehow deal with any bias or unfair outcomes. And that's completely naive. It overlooks that, not all biases are the result of the low quality data. So the high quality data, the technical solution cannot address the underlying problem that is not only the technical problem. So the actual question is the design process itself. who participates in the design of the AI system, who is consulted, who is included, who is not included and should be. So we need a clear pathway for a socio-technological process, not just the technical process of clearing up mistakes that will help avoid discriminatory and unfair outcomes. So for example, there is no obligation on the provider and the user of high-risk AI systems to require consultation with potentially affected communities or groups or public in general. So civic participation, inclusion, anti-discrimination is lacking a lot. I'll stop here.
I will come back to that. I wanna just devote more time into this because also from this.
Go ahead.
So we'll come back, but thanks for that. This is super important in the terms of inclusivity and participation. This is a big topic. I just see there's a strange light breaking my head into two. We'll try to deal it a bit later. Kevin, what I'm missing, and please, because you had so interesting case that actually, if you can briefly tell it to people what you had, because this is exactly, at least at my understanding, this is why such a regulation should be in the force, to protect the clients that you have.
Sure. So what we do at Legal Aid is provide free legal services to people who don't have much money, who are living at or near our poverty line. Our country's healthcare system for people in poverty is called Medicaid. Medicaid provides some in-home care benefits to people who otherwise would need to go to a nursing home. So people with pretty severe physical disabilities or who are elderly. And the state used an algorithm to decide how much care somebody was going to get instead of a nurse's professional judgment. And this resulted in massive cuts of care, anywhere between 20 to 50%, with lots of suffering, people lying in their own waste, people skipping meals, not getting baths. I mean, just incredible human suffering. And so that's what I fought against, and we were successful after a few years. And so when I read the proposed regulation, I'm a lawyer, and we have this saying, right? When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so the first thing I went to after kind of the substance was Article 71, the penalties and kind of looking at the enforcement regime. And there was nothing that I thought was meaningful. I understand that there's going to be administrative enforcement by the newly designated bodies, right? And there was an estimate of between 1 and 25 full-time employees. And even then, if you had 25 full-time employees devoted to enforcement of this regulation, it's so broad that, even if you had the desire to enforce it, you're not going to have the capacity to enforce it. And meanwhile, there was no corresponding ability to enforce it as individuals or civil society or whatnot. Now, I know the GDPR might factor into how enforcement works and looks, but that was still immensely disappointing when you're going to leave it to administrative enforcement. They're just not going to do it. I mean, look, in the US, we don't do antitrust enforcement against Google, right? Or Apple or other things. I can't imagine you're going to have that much more success.
Thanks so much for this. And Katarzyna, what's missing? I mean, I was looking for the word explainability because this is something that interests you. That's not much about it, huh?
Not at all. I mean, there is a huge gap between the standard for high-risk systems, and I will get back to this standard, what is missing in it as well, which I would call empty but bureaucratic, and limited risk, what is used in the regulation, or anything else that is not even seen as risk for these systems that I truly believe should be still explainable for affected persons and could actually come with serious harms underappreciated by European Commission. There is simply nothing. The only thing we have is some kind of vague signalization for the natural person. Hey, you are dealing with an AI system. That's it. And then you have this database, like far, far away in the sky for the high-risk systems that are few, very limited category. You have a publicly available database with still quite mysterious concepts like instructions for use that will be publicly available, undefined. But the whole rich technical documentation, all levels of explainability in the regulation are specifically meant for professional users of the systems. So if you buy Google or Amazon system as a hospital or police, you will learn something. And that something is pretty interesting. I like the list of that something that professional users will learn, but I would love to learn at least part of it myself, either as watchdog organization or independent researcher, auditor, or affected person. None of these other external people will learn anything based on what I have read so far. Maybe we will still hear some details regarding the publicly available database for high-risk systems, that some information might be included there. It's an annex, that annex can be updated and improved. Okay, fair enough. But now I'm coming back to the system for high risk, the regime for high risk systems. Even here we have what I would call lack of realism, or maybe even lack of good intentions for banning technology that is defined in a way that I fear is just unprovable. Nobody can prove in the court that he or she has been affected to the extent that they would have to prove in order for the system to fall into the high risk category. Yes, and in the context of lack of any legal mechanism for affected individuals, anything simpler than going to the civil court, I just don't see that happening. I don't see, clearly speaking, that there is a person affected by AI-driven system on the border or somewhere where high risk should apply. That system is not on the list. That system has never been classified as such by the creators or professional users. So nobody except for the affected person believes that that thing is high risk. And what happens next? I cannot see that. Where that person goes? To the domestic civil court to say, hey, I was crossing the border and something affected me and I feel harmed. This is just ridiculous. There is not a single paragraph on affected persons, where they are supposed to go, where they are supposed to send signals. We have supervisory bodies and we have notified bodies, which is like a new league of auditors, probably a very nice profession opening in front of many lawyers and data scientists. But all these people will not be dealing with great majority of high-risk systems, because I think only biometric systems will be certified by these notified bodies, and everything else. So the whole bureaucracy, crazy bureaucracy of the system will happen internally only. Yes, so only a hospital or only Google selling things to hospital will self-assess internally, will use these 3 or 5 chapters full of stuff internally without even sending external signal of how they apply that super complex regulation to their system. I mean, come on, is it a joke, or is it ill intention, or just not thought well enough? I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Katarzyna. I used my own eyes to recognize your emotions, and I saw that, like, both of you, I mean, Kevin and Vanja, would like to already refer to something Katarzyna said, or one of you. So feel free. Also, it's a conversation. Don't worry about me. If you want to jump in, just do it.
Yeah, but maybe just to follow on what Katarzyna said. I mean, there's no logic to it, because there is no, and the reason why there is no logic to it, I tried to figure out why there is no logic to it. And so here's my opinion on it. There is no logic to it because there's no structured process of how actually these systems are assessed. They're kind of mixed up in one category, then, as she mentioned, the huge amount is left unregulated, basically just the transparency requirement, and there's no logic. So the logic should be that there is an explicit human rights impact assessment at the beginning, right? So this conformity assessment procedure doesn't include currently the requirement to actually have a human rights impact assessment.
Yeah.
So if you don't assess it at the start, how do you know at which category it should fit, right? And what's the level of the risk? So, and then there is no mention of how do you include constituencies, vulnerable groups, potentially affected in this assessment as well. So what it should look like is we actually try to, at ECNL, we try to play around with the potential proposal and how this should be streamlined in order to have some kind of logic. So there should be a human rights impact assessment at the starting point for all potentially systems entering the market, for all potential regulatory actions. And then the first underlying question is the technology effective for the purpose? Is there any other less intrusive way to achieve the same results? Is the purpose even legitimate? And if that's answered, then you go into the actual assessment. The link that my colleague shared, or if you want to give me a short permission to share the screen, I can show you the kind of a tree that we kind of envisaged how this process could look like. And that would, I think, bring more logic into the process of, you know, what we are trying to figure out here and how to classify different variations.
Go ahead. Yes,
yeah.
Try, yeah. Just, and then you have to give me back my powers, okay?
Yeah, of course. I'm not going to
on the way. Yes, let's. So
that's real trust. Commission should learn from you, Krzysztof.
Yeah. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So if we have a real, meaningful human rights impact assessment as a starting point, and then we say that there are 3 potential results, right? So first result is something that is fundamentally incompatible with human rights, democracy, rule of law. That's a ban, right? We don't have to look at that anymore. Then we have a second category that is actually very severe impact on human rights, rule of law, or democracy. The reason why we are using the broader definition is this is something that the Council of Europe is using now within their process of establishing potential international standards. Then we go into moratorium phase, because this is something that needs to be tested further, right? And iterated further. All the other impacts are then categorized in various risk levels: high, medium, lower level risk, and that they go into the tier-based risk assessment, right? And then the actual risk assessment shows under which regulatory requirement a certain system should fall under, you know. And then you have a couple of risk categories where you say, okay, this is higher risk, it needs more regulation; medium risk, less regulation; lower risk, maybe just a transparency requirement. But then the whole approach is kind of, to our sense, from the human rights perspective, more logical. And then at the end of this process, you make categorizations of the risk, and then you have public registers, then you have evaluations, so then you have, of course, a repeated accountability checks, then you need an oversight mechanism and the structure. Then this oversight board, or whatever it's going to be called, makes actual sense, because they would then oversee a whole lot more of the systems than actually proposed now, and so on. So that's just one idea of how we think through the, you know, human rights lens, civics freedoms lens, how this process should work.
Great, thank you.
Can I only jump in to say how much I agree?
Yes, please, Katarzyna. I just want to remind Vanja to give me back my permission.
Sorry, you have waived your powers publicly. Everybody could see that it was voluntary.
No, I mean, she can, you know, she can keep up meeting people, but let her concentrate on the panel. Anyway, yes. Jump in, Katarzyna.
Yeah,
yes.
so very briefly, because I have just shared our full position, although I know that, you know, 10-page long policy document is not what we love to read when we have so much on the plate anyway. So very briefly, strong +1 to what Vanja presented, and we already had that system in mind. I believe everybody had that similar system in mind who commented as civil society. So there has to be a general framework of assessing risk for everybody producing systems that might affect natural persons, because otherwise, how can you say where you position yourself as high or low risk? And only later on, after you have done that initial assessment and you have classified yourself as high, low, or medium, you have different obligations, where we believe that this general obligation of not explaining the system, I wouldn't use that term, but warning natural persons that they are dealing with AI-driven system, and giving them basic information, at least like a summary of technical documentation or a summary of your human rights impact assessment and what you concluded there, should be a must for everybody. and only the high-risk systems, they should notify to supervisory authorities. They should work with external auditors, which, as I said before, are now only meant to work with producers of one subtype of high-risk system, so almost nothing. Yes, and the full documentation should be required. Yes, for those systems that have self-assessed as high risk. So that would be the model that we recommended, and I strongly believe that most of us here recommended the same thing. So, who the Commission was listening to, what concepts they were processing, if none of what we all suggested makes true? I just wonder, who is it for? Who was the most successful lobbyist behind this? Because was it big platforms because they are simply unregulated here? Do we believe that big platforms and their AI systems that are outside of the scope of this regulation, they will be covered by DSA DMA reform or what? Like, I just wonder what game was behind the scene so the result is so poor.
I have a nice question for this later, inspired by the one that Frederica put on the chat, actually. Kevin, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, the standard right now for the deployment, at least of algorithmic decision making, and I assume it's going to be the same with more advanced AI, is, you know, invent, maybe test, maybe not, sell to, at least from my perspective, most of what I'm concerned about is government agencies, but certainly in the private sector, sell, deploy, destroy people's lives, and then maybe if there's enough of a pushback, do some fixing around the edges or whatever accountability is in place. And right now, the problem, at least we face in the US, is the bad incentives, right? There's no real risk for bad actors doing that and deploying unless the harm is just absolutely egregious and intolerable. And usually it's harm focused on vulnerable communities, marginalized communities, as I think Katarzyna and Vanja pointed out, don't necessarily have the resources or ability to fight back in a civil court system. And from what I read of this, and I mean, this is partly a question, I don't see that this changes incentives at all, either on private developers of these systems, the purchasers of these systems, or the government agencies that might implement them. So, I mean, maybe it's partly a question, does anybody see any significant change in incentives to produce better outcomes that don't just disrupt people's lives without any forethought?
Yeah, okay, I'm not muted. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is like, let's go to this inclusiveness also. I think this is the, I mean, what we said so far, that like as human beings, but like as citizens, we don't feel we have an impact here at all. And the other problematic issue, I think, also concerning the understanding, at least the understanding we see in the regulation of the high risk systems, that there is no default idea that we should, as Vanja was saying, do the human rights impact assessment here, but also like from our perspective, and these were also our recommendations, I can say now for 2 years, is to treat a high risk systems, every system that is used in the public sector, because you know it or not, I mean, the way the Commission just described it, it's so vague. I mean, I love, of course, to use my own examples, but you know, we have this litigation on accessing to the this is not AI, but still automatic system of allocating the judges to the specific court cases. It doesn't fall, if it's even AI, it doesn't fall under the regulation because it's not directly influenced, right? This access to the public services, but at the same time, it does have a strong impact on my rights to the court. I mean, who will be a judge, right? Who will be judging my case? So this is I think also bad here. So what ideas you would have apart from what we heard so far, including this human rights assessment, which is also, I understand, the part of the opportunity to talk with the marginalized groups, with individuals, whatever. What ideas you would see for bigger inclusivity that should be regulated, and we don't see that in the actual proposal? Anyone? Vanja.
Well, it can start, it doesn't have to start with regulation, actually. It should be part of the proposal, definitely, but it can start even before that, because this whole culture of inclusivity should start at the design process. And there are people in the tech community that they want to actually design, the products that are practical and that they are useful and meaningful. They want to talk to the groups and people who are going to be, involved or affected. They don't know how, or they don't know who to reach out to. So there's this huge, and we have been a part of the Mozilla's AI trustworthy work group, where I've met some lovely people working on different, designs and AI products. They were like, oh, but who do we talk to? How do we? When we think about the tech community, we tend to think about the big tech, right? So that's a whole nother story. But there's a lot of untapped potential, I would say, where there's tech community eager and open to ideas of inclusivity that we haven't yet have resources or managed time to explore. So that's one part. And maybe, showcasing some guidance or pathways on how to include different groups or people or the public at large in the design process could help bridge some of these gaps. And of course, when we come to the products that would be used for the public service, for example, this should be embedded in the rules that the design process and the impact assessment process must include participatory procedures, and it should be done in a way that it's meaningful and really reaching out to the groups that are most affected, usually left out of these debates.
Kevin, how is it for you? Because you were working with the marginalized groups. I mean, let me be a devil's advocate for a while. I mean, how you would imagine to include the people who has so many problems in life to be included in AI discussion?
I mean, it takes a lot of intentional work, and I'm afraid that what would happen is you have these cursory, let me find somebody who I can say is a member of an affected community that I sort of talk to, in a informal way, and everything else. So it has the potential, even that has the potential to just be cover for bad actors. Organizing around this stuff takes a lot of time and effort. And if there were a proposal out, the affected community would, one, need to understand how, whatever the proposal is, how it's going to work, do all the analysis, have time to get together if it's not already a pre-existing group, and then have formal mechanisms for input. But beyond that, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, is what happens when the listening isn't good? What happens when the input that the community manages to give is ignored? What happens when the final outcome is something that's vastly distinct from what they wanted? And there, again, it's the practicing lawyer in me is, can they sue, right? Or can they do something? What's the substantive right that they have regarding that input and how that input is translated into action? And without some definition about that, community input's just going to be more cover. Oh, we talked to Kevin and he was fine with it. It was okay, All right, great.
Katarzyna, you want to add on this?
Not on this, on the previous thought that Vanja started by differentiating between well-intentioned and ill-intentioned actors, and asking the question, how can we include marginalized communities or affected individuals in the design process? I think in the regulation part, we should focus on, well, bad actors is not enough to say. As I suggested in the chat, we often have uninformed actors who are unaware of what they are really implementing and applying to people. And that part could be solved by a very sophisticated transparency measures included in the proposal for professional users. Only the super narrow layer of high-risk systems makes that whole value limited to only most obvious, most strikingly harmful systems, while everything else goes unregulated. And in that everything else, I wouldn't worry about situations in which designers want to be inclusive, in which designers want to self-reflect. I have just shared the link to AI blind spot discovery process designed like 2 years ago by a group of people, including data scientists, who started that effort because they saw from the companies where they worked, including YouTube, I believe, that this is an issue, that quite often designers want to be inclusive, they want to be reflective, they want to identify harms. We don't have problems with those guys, yes? They have tools. The problem is with either bad actors or uninformed actors. So implementations like Compass in the US. I refer to that case because I believe everybody here knows it quite well too.
No, actually, sorry, Kasia, I'm not sure everyone. Just very briefly tell about it, please.
Yeah, that's a pretty infamous case that was made loud by ProPublica a couple of years ago after they discovered that a system called Compass that was implemented in the US with the intention of preventing discrimination on the basis of race, among other factors in the US, actually resulted in discrimination. Yes, so the intention of the system, which was to work with clear bias in the decisions of judges, human judges, who were more likely to keep arrested Black people than white people. In response to that problem, a very rational AI-driven system was implemented, Compass. That system was meant not to repeat the same patterns, but in a strange way, it repeated the patterns. That's a very simplified version of what happened, because the system indeed had a good intention, and the buyer of the system, the court, I don't know who precisely bought that in the US, could believe that what they are implementing is actually the right thing to do because the intentions were correct. But when you looked deeper in the documentation that was not made public at the beginning of the whole story, you would discover that technical parameters were clearly not in line with these intentions. Yes, so one of the parameters, namely the loss function, was calibrated in a way that it had to lead to discriminatory impact for the Black people because the proportion of Black and white population in the defendants population in the training data was different, was crude. It wasn't rocket science. Everybody who understands data science could clearly see that that particular loss function and the way in which system treated different types of errors that had to occur, because errors always occur in AI-driven systems, necessarily led to discrimination of one category of people because of how the training sets were designed, because of how the system was designed. And this is a very good example showing what we gain with transparency. Yes, if we know these things, if we have publicly available documentation, or at least independent auditors have this documentation, they can confront the purpose of the system, the intention behind the system, and the technical choices made by the designers. And they can question these technical choices and say, hey, for this particular system, you need to change this loss function, or you need to apply a different logic, because with the particular data set you have, you will end up in the same trouble where you started. Yes, this is what we learned with Compass case. It wasn't meant to discriminate, not at all. It was meant to do the opposite. But the reality proved different, yes? So this is why we need to pierce the black box. And I'm super happy to see one thing in this regulation, which is a long list of requirements for the systems that do exactly this: pierce the black box, prove that explainability of decisions, design decisions. I explained what I mean by design decisions in the essay. I also copy-pasted in the chat, so you can read more. That part of transparency is achievable. We can always demand it. We can always interrogate creators of the systems to uncover what they had in mind designing the system, what the system is meant to do. We can, but why? I'm asking only for super high risk, limited systems, and not everything else that affects people. I don't understand that super limited application of the regulation, or this is clearly the successful result of corporate lobbying against what we wanted.
Kevin, you want to chip in with this now? I see that. No? Okay.
No, just nodding in agreement.
Okay, you're just agreeing. I mean, that's good. Yeah, so basically, this also leads me to the question I saw in the chat by Frederica. How much the regulation would affect Google or Amazon or other, you know, big companies? Because I understand the question is also, you know, connected with this, that we have this, you know, struggle between innovation and economy and human rights, naivety, you know, I'm joking, of course, but you know what I mean. I mean, but the regulation is also like have this direct impact on the producers, and especially the big producers, not only the big, but these are the biggest, and this is also the matter of the problem with the competition, because this is something like I have this crazy idea, which is naive, like, you know, that the companies would compete which is more ethical or more open, more inclusive, right? I would love to see such a competition, but I think it doesn't work like this on the market. So will it affect or have an impact on big companies in any way, the regulation, you think?
Only if they decide to self-regulate. There is one article saying that you can come up with, or the Commission will encourage, obviously, everybody to come up with voluntary codes of conduct. Maybe they will co-regulate. So that's a big maybe. The only line in which I could see practices that I think are performed by big tech currently, which is targeting people based on their vulnerabilities in order to modify their behavior. This is the only place covered by the regulation that could be linked to real world practices of big tech. That place, I will paste it in the chat, is written in such a narrow way, such an incredibly narrow way. The standard is so high because the standard says that for these practices to be forbidden, actually it's a ban, we need to prove that vulnerabilities are specifically about age, physical, mental disability only. So only these three categories of vulnerabilities need to be exploited, and exploited to the extent that it causes or is likely to cause that person or another person physical or psychological harm. Again, how and where, in which procedure we prove it, I don't know. So only under these conditions, these practices of targeting people could be prohibited. But there is nothing about real world, day-to-day targeting based on vulnerabilities that happens all the time, that is not as harmful as I have read, but still harmful. We have nothing on them, and this is why I think that big tech goes unregulated here.
Yeah, and plus how you'd measure a harm on society. I mean, there is a very short notions on that in the regulation, but I don't really understand what they mean by that. Vanja, you want
a lot of it will depend on exactly what Kasia was just enumerating, like tiny gritty nitty details of the wording, and then what we can expect is just, you know, the army of lobbyists descending now on as we speak on this draft, and, you know, just tweaking the words here and there in order not to have their business model caught in the net of the interpretation of this proposal. It's also depending on the oversight, and, you know, who's gonna hold the accountability whip. And, you know, here, as Kevin was saying, you know, how am I as an end user or potentially affected going to be able to assert my rights and my claim, and where and with whom, and then who's going to be liable for it? So there's not much mention of the very structured governance there, and this is something that is lacking as well.
Yeah, I think we also in this regard we'll have a quite interesting situation, because we have now I think every at least European Union member country, there's different AI policies, and the part of the AI policies is also to bring more regulation. We were lucky enough with Katarzyna to have a quite open minister that listened to us and actually accepted some of our remarks. And there is this debate. Of course, it's a policy document so far. It's not a regulation yet, so we'll see in the practice. But also, I do see that we can have a two-speed regulations, or even within the Europe. I mean, some countries, even there is this regulation, we can, and that's something that concerns me also even more in the terms of the other countries. Like you said about it, and the regulation is also telling about it, what's happening at the border, right? Usage of the system. I mean, these people, I mean, isn't it a part of the, this, how the Fortress Europe, actually, the digital Fortress Europe, in the sense that you don't have any rights, also like, being on the border. But my one of the last questions actually I have before we get into the broader conversation, also in connection is in what you have said, is how you think in 5 years this is going to look like. I'm asking the question because the Commission is also referring like, we will check something. We just let it go. We are also aware that it's 2 years more. But if this regulation, the proposal we're going to see, will be implemented, or those lobbyists will change it completely. But let us assume, no, this is the regulation we'll have. It will be implemented in 1 or 2 years. What impact will have? None? Or I just want to find some optimism, some positive things that you can share with us.
You made it too narrow, I mean, for optimism, but okay, joking. I do think it might have one effect, which is deterring European big buyers like hospitals, police departments, governments based in Europe from even dealing with high-risk systems, because the level of bureaucracy and exposure is pretty high. Although I think that it will have that effect only for the most exposed buyers, because everybody else can just digest that bureaucracy internally. So for institutions who are, for example, experienced enough in dealing with EU level bureaucracy anyway, because they've been processing grants or processing documentation, for them, it all boils down to producing more documentation, and here it is. So that effect, I fear, will only apply to the most exposed, politically exposed buyers, like big hospitals for the pandemic-related systems, or police departments, maybe border guards, because yeah, the level of bureaucracy here is pretty high. Everybody else, I think, will just do this and say, okay, our experimentation is unlimited, and we even have AI sandboxes and other prompts and encouragements for startups, whatever it means these days. So yeah, we just create more of the same, and we tell people you are interacting with an AI, so people get maybe a pop-up or a warning sign or something that will be meaningless because it will say nothing, but that can also be used to market products. Yes, we might say this is a European trusted AI product, certified or something like that. Yeah. So that could even have a positive for the market, positive marketing effect of even encouraging people to trust more in something that is unexplainable, undocumented, unassessed in terms of risk. So pretty detrimental.
I asked about positive things, but you had to finish with the one. Kevin, how about you? I mean, especially also from the US perspective. I mean, you don't like the regulations, right? I mean, I'm generalizing, of course. I know you are, but
yeah, I mean, I guess the one possible outcome of this is it embeds transparency as the fundamental accountability regime for AI and related systems. That would probably be more than what we have in the US now, certainly, but it also comes with its own problems, because I don't think transparency leads meaningfully to accountability, especially for communities who are most likely to be harmed by these things. So I think, on one hand, reading this, I really like the documentation aspect of it. Like, I like that this stuff has to be recorded. And if you're fighting this and somehow can access it through a Freedom of Information, open records request, that stuff can be helpful for organizing and pushing back. I do like that. So if that were embedded in somehow a US regime, okay, it's more than we have now. But ultimately, if this is what we are going to aim for, we're going to end up far short of that. And then it's not going to mean anything for us. And so, I guess optimistically, outside of that, maybe it opens us up to look elsewhere, to human rights regimes, to Latin America, to Asia, to Africa, to some other parts of the world that maybe can do more creatively in terms of regulating meaningfully AI.
Okay.
Picking up on Kevin's point, I just wanted to say that much was expected from Europe in terms of protecting the rights. Now that we are all kind of disappointed, exactly, we can turn to see what are the other avenues. One that comes to mind is the ongoing battle, actually, in the Council of Europe's CAHI process. Consultation is still open, by the way. We will post a link here. If you haven't answered the very tedious online questionnaire that they have, please do provide your thoughts and input from any part of the world. It's open to everybody. Although it's very limited, since it's online survey only, every civic voice counts. So I'll post
Up
the
to 29th of April.
Yeah, until 29th of April. So a couple of more days left. So but please answer, because this is now going to be the next battleground. And because they're basing their work on the framework, under the framework of the European Convention for Human Rights, it is a more rights-based approach, right? Or at least we hope.
And more inclusive. Well, this is what more inclusive is, not only the EU, right? So
yeah, it's Council of Europe plus the observers of the US, Canada, Mexico, Colombia now joining, Japan, Israel. So it strives to become an international standard setter. Now that the EU has done its flop. Another potential positive aspect could be the more awakening of the civil society and activism on this, because for now, I think that, you know, aside from lack of awareness, understanding, educational aspects, so on, there was also nothing concrete to actually look at, right? Now we have this proposal, potentially even the rules. And as Kevin mentioned, now we have something to kind of latch on and try to dig on more, either through, you know, trying to raise cases, trying to, you know, do the strategic litigation, or trying to advocate for changes of some of the things that we can prove are not working in practice. So there's more concrete meat that civil society can do. It's kind of classic, you know, mapping out the gaps and then advocating for very targeted changes, and then, you know, strategic litigations and cases and so on. So there's more of that opportunity now as well, I hope. This, of course, has to be matched with more resources for civil society to work on this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the, because, you know, when I also love to talk about, you know, engaging civil society, etc. But when we were also preparing with Vanja and Alexandra for this meeting, we're super also I said worry also about like how our audience, which is mostly a CSO, will understand or will be open to understanding in the terms of, you know, lack of capacity of talking on technological language, right? This is complicated even for lawyers as ourselves, as yes, we are all lawyers actually here, but this is something that it's a huge concern, I think, that if you want to really implement it, monitor, even with this bad regulation, actually, I mean, if you want to monitor, if you want to access to documentation, as the civil society organization or the civil society as general, we should know more about it. That's for sure, like building this capacity. And I think it's super important. And again, personally, thank you for the European AI Fund for doing this. I think it's a well thing. Okay, I mean, it's in different time zones, but it's Warsaw. In Warsaw, it's 5:01. So I'm giving. Thank you so much. It is not that you just want to go away. And still, Vanja, if you go away, you will end up all meeting because you're the host here. I have to tell it. So
please don't leave. Because...
Yeah. So don't leave. You can't leave. So we have now the 30 minutes of more open discussion. I will be maybe participating if Anna allowed me to speak at
Absolutely. It's just I will try to moderate, I hope, a stream of voices and
thank you for
opinions.
this part so much. It was a great conversation so far.
And I can, as non-lawyer, as a non-technologist, thank you so much for summarizing it with this a lot of emotions that actually, for me, from my perspective, it helps me remember what are the points, and especially the discussion in regards what should be assessed, when it should be assessed, and what, if I am having a conversation with anybody, what, as a human rights oriented person, what is more or less my opinion. Thank you so much for that. And I'm pretty sure I will share this recording with some of my friends that might not be as aware. So that was, thank you for kind of translating a very difficult process and very difficult document for people like me, and bringing examples as well. That was extremely helpful. And now for everybody else, if you want to take part in the discussion, feel free to unmute yourself and also maybe start the video. However, we're not pushing for that. And if you have a comment or you have a thought or a question, it's a perfect moment to start. You can either use the, okay, Kevin, thank you so much for being with us at this really strange hour for a human being, which is the very morning in the LA.
Thank you all so much for having me. I really enjoyed being here and very grateful you invited me. Hope to
Thank
see
you,
you all
and
soon.
have a great day. So are there voices that we can, I started before maybe somebody will jump in. I started thinking that it's, so when something is complicated enough, it becomes magic. And I think that the AI discussion from outside of technology or maybe legislative work, it started to become magic for a normal person, and even I think a normal activist. It's so difficult to follow even the words that Katarzyna was using. I mean, a calibration, and it's data science. So it impacts lives so easily, and yet it is so difficult to grasp on the everyday level, and even probably writing as a journalist is so difficult to bring it. So I guess coming back to the advocacy and this strengthening the civil society voice, what I would ask you as the main advocate, what are the strategies to engage more people to strengthen the voices? What worked so far for Panoptykon, for more lawyers, also societies?
Well, I cannot say what has worked so far, because I don't think we have had that battle in the past. It's a very new battle for us, and we are also struggling with building our capacity for that battle. For me, exactly that stake that you Anna, you named, preventing that fear that I'm interacting with a too complicated system and I'm actually not allowed to talk because I don't understand it, and it's so easy to silence me. In order to prevent that effect, in our case, we spent last 3 years at least learning from data scientists, and it's like going in circles in a way. We started with very bold claims like explainability above all, we have to explain it all, and then a year later I hear myself saying a very different thing. I hear myself saying, wait, is explainability the holy grail, or is fairness more important, or is accountability more important? And how you define accountability? Like today, I think we all agree that creating a system where a individual affected person has no place to go, has no trusted body to interact with, there is no accountability, yes, no matter what they put in this very complicated regulation in terms of legal language. So we have learned a lot, and for me, that learning curve, it was an iterative process. Yes, I shared a couple of minutes ago a link to an essay I co-authored with a data scientist and another public advocate, and it was a learning process for us to even write it. Today, I would write it differently, obviously. Yes, so I think I have no other advice than talk to people who know, be open about what you don't understand. Don't assume, don't rush that you will learn quickly. It will take time, but also don't be afraid to openly make claims that are not bulletproof. It is a learning process. Yes, we should be able to make claims that are not bulletproof, like explainability claim being made so many times by our network in the past. And right now we say maybe explainability, maybe that was too much. Maybe it's not about explaining the code. Definitely it's not about the code. Definitely it's about different things. Yes, calibration, optimization. These are the holy grails for me today. And now I'm looking for the language to be understandable when I say it. So last year, Panoptykon created a very simple, I believe, guide to explain that field. And that guide was meant for lay audience, for people who are not experts. And you know what turned out? Experts read it, we read it all again, policy people read it, and they appreciate, because the level of difficulty is so high that other experts need that explanation before we even start addressing lay audience. So indeed, like the challenge is language, the challenge is imagination, but the challenge is also not be afraid to make claims that you are not super confident about, because that's our right to discuss, to think.
Thank you, Katarzyna. That brings me to the point that they say that the best thing right now is to ask the right questions. It's not even having the right answers, because probably there is no right answer. So that really sounds. Would you mind sharing the guidelines of the explanations that you just
although
mentioned?
it's in Polish only, but if anybody has funds and ability to translate it, here it is. It's all open source. It's here to be taken by somebody and translated.
Yeah, I think Marlena said yes. Yeah, no.
We just did.
Thank you so much. I will definitely go into that.
I just add one thing, Anna. Sorry to that. Also, yeah, we had Thomas from Digital Freedom Fund. He just left us a moment ago. But it's also worth to tell about the one of the, I don't know, it's not even a project, but more an activity the Digital Freedom Fund did. In terms of meeting the technologists and lawyers. I mean, this is, this was the level even like 1 year ago when we were, no, 1 year ago while I was sitting at home, 2-3 years ago, meeting the people who are lawyers and I guess quite good lawyers, quite good technologists, and we just learned to understand each other. And this was, this is a complicated, this is a complicated process, and that's the reason I do feel this is our obligation also as CSOs, and there's many also in this room that doing a great job to be a best translator as possible for the society, because this is, yeah.
Marlena, first of all, thank you so much for being so active and so helpful on the chat. It's totally appreciated, and now it will be lovely to hear you speak.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's so nice to see you. I'm in San Francisco. Thanks so much for organizing. It's great to see friends old and new on the call. Just real quick, following up on what Kasia said, yes, it's super hard to participate. And we have the similar experience at ECNL where on CAHI, for example, Council of Europe, we wrote an answer guide a couple of weeks ago, specifically targeting non-digital rights orgs, and actually almost only digital rights orgs read it. That being said, one thing that was kind of a breakthrough for me a couple weeks ago that I think could help more participation is moving away a little bit from the black box and the model, which super important, like your Medium article, Kasia has said, and we've been focusing a lot, but actually spend most of our energy on the input and the output, because that's really where a lot of civil society existing expertise and understanding can come in, when oftentimes the technologists either don't know themselves or don't care or don't have that perspective. And this actually, I had this small breakthrough by talking with a technologist who said, we focus on such a small element of it and we kind of forget everything else. So by framing the question in what are the data sources that go into any system, and if you're thinking about criminal justice, kind of immediately civil rights activists know that some groups are over-policed and therefore there is too much data. Other groups know that there's missing data. If we're thinking about Roma or trans person, there's not enough data, right? And then on the flip side, when we think of the output, is the goal legitimate to begin with? So when we think of Compass or risk assessment tool, is it even a valid question to have a machine essentially decide if someone should be locked up or not? And hypothetically, even if the black box were, we released it, and even if it were perfect, do we want such a system? Do we want to live in a world where an algorithmic driven machine essentially puts people in cages, right? So these are questions that actually don't need any technical knowledge. And before being at ECNL, I used to be at an AI driven organization, AI only nonprofit that had its own issues. But all this to say that I think there's almost too much emphasis and I'd say like resources spent to try to understand technology, where we have so much more to bring from the other side than empowering orgs to bring in that expertise and that understanding, I think is super important. And it's almost on a confidence level, right? Like people silence themselves and think that they have nothing to contribute. So yeah, it goes both ways. On the capacity building, real quick, I put in the chat, ECNL is now launching a capacity building initiative, I guess you can say, for civil society. Initially, and actually like mostly working with non-digital rights groups. If anyone is interested here, please reach out with an email. We just had our first session last week or 2 weeks ago. But yeah, really trying to bring in other voices. And I think the key message for us is to build confidence and empower, because that, from my experience, is like the first barrier where people don't even try to participate because they think that calibration, like you mentioned, Anna, or these terms are important when oftentimes they're not.
Thank you, Marlena. I was just like, I had those impulses that what Vanja said in the very beginning for this confidence. So flipping out the paradigms, like, yes, we need to have innovation despite all cost. No, it's not true. It's just this voice is not heard. So this part is, excuse me, I have no idea where this sound comes from. So my point is that this confidence from civil society that is weak and underfunded, even if we make up with hearts and great minds, is this confidence is absolutely key. And I think that some kind of assertiveness training is an interesting approach outside of the box. But also I thought there is this assumption that we have that the decision makers that we are contacting, that they actually know what they're talking about. Most probably they don't. They probably know even less than we do. That's why it's so easy probably for whoever is on the other side to persuade them that they know the magic better than we know the magic. And it just looks better. They have more money. There is a longer period. There's a longer tradition of their lobbying in that regard. So I think that kind of having this brave pose of the girl against the bull on the Wall Street is kind of a silly yet quite accurate metaphor of what we need somehow. Vanja, I'm really curious of your thoughts.
Oh yeah, you summed it up absolutely right. Actually, Marlena was the one who empowered us a little bit more last year when we were also kind of, in this in-between limbo of, do we dare actually speak about these things, or are we just, a civil society's kind of civic rights organization that doesn't really have anything to do with technology? And then we understood that actually, this is a human rights issue. AI systems and regulation is a human rights and civic freedoms issue. It's not a digital issue only. It's also a human rights and civic freedoms issue. So, and then, I distinctly remember, Marlena saying to us, but you guys know the policies and human rights problems and civic freedoms problems. And that's exactly what's needed in this conversation. Therefore, you are invited to participate in these debates. And I was like, yeah, we are, but nobody's actually inviting us. So we have to knock ourselves. And we have to knock hard, right? So that's the point. We have to knock on the door hard. I think, let's not forget now the door to knock to in the next, a long period of time is the European Parliament. We still don't know which committee will land this beautiful piece of proposal on their table, but and that will shape and frame the discussion and the debate and lobbying and advocacy a lot. But as soon as we know, we should try to kind of make a concerted and coordinated effort from various sides, but just at least to be, you know, aware of what's happening on various sides of advocacy polls, to really express civic demands and asks on the parliament, because that's now the main, I would say, battleground, and then the council after that.
That's for the European Union. I really like that we managed to expand the conversation a bit before further on the European Union, because also I feel like I'm so privileged living in the European Union as the digital fortress. Europe is just so incredibly unfair, and by building the mechanisms to keep it that are even more invisible to a normal citizen, that's also really seems even less unfair. Recently I started thinking about it calls hope-based narrative. So like what kind of the world we want to show to people so they can follow us as who can deliver this dream, basically. So they know what, not only what are we fighting against, but also what we are fighting for. And this is difficult because there is so many bad examples of AI not serving human rights and civil freedoms. It's just, this part is also kind of missing in the narrative.
It is, yes.
Katarzyna,
we need to be constructive, yeah.
Sure. You are writing so much. I am so impressed with your capacity of listening and writing. You have a superpower, definitely, and it's amazing that you're on our side. Would you like to kind of very quickly summarize?
Yeah, sure. Although I see Krzysztof sending a signal to us.
Yeah, I just have one question before summarizing, because it's super interesting for me, because I was, of course, kind of concentrated as we all were reading the text and also reading the comments from our side of the barricade, let's say. But have you had a chance already, like, to see what are the reactions of the lobby? I mean, companies and
business and for profit.
Business, yeah. What is the reaction of the business? I mean, you or maybe someone else.
If you ask me, no, I haven't. I saw our side being very vocal and critical, and just by watching our disappointment, I can only imagine the happiness on the other side. One other observation: we are, as Panoptykon, we are now in the process of talking to companies based in Poland about how they communicate AI systems to end users, because we have that small research project to inform our advocacy on that thing. And everybody agreed to talk to us, including Netflix, Google, many powerful e-commerce platforms. The banks refused, which means, and that is in line with what we find in the document, e-commerce platforms are not covered. They can talk to us. They are actually quite happy about the freedom they have to explore what they might like to do, because they are not under obligation to do anything. And the banks are concerned about their obligations, so they prefer to keep silent. So I think that's what we will see on the lobbying, on the corporate lobbying side, that there is a lot of happiness for big platforms because they go unregulated, and maybe the banks will be the ones who will fight back. But what I put in the chat was my suggestion on how to improve that terrible draft, not on the positive note, but maybe to start discussion about what's one of you suggested as well, that we should pressure more as network and be more vocal with what we want. So this will be like the obvious asks, maybe not completely unrealistic. And on the points made by Vanja and Anna Kuliberda earlier about changing the narrative and simply saying no to to certain tendencies that we don't like. I fully agree, although this is a campaign. This is a narrative building or narrative changing effort. This is not a lobbying effort, yes? So probably we will have to keep it separate in the next years to come. Build our critical narrative so that AI is no longer seen as the obvious next step for our civilization or the must-have solution for every societal problem, certainly. But this is a narrative building effort. What we have to catch up with as well is the legislation that unfortunately goes against us these days. So, and these are, I think, two efforts to be coordinated, but not the same thing.
Thank you. That makes so much sense and just makes it we need a broader network. And the specialists on building narratives and the amazing lawyers for amazing and really delivering lobbying. So, and yet that brings us to the language. We need to have the same language within the network and being able to understand it. Marlena.
Yeah, just a quick response to Krzysztof's point on lobbying and Cash App, perfectly like framed. So just +1. So I'm in San Francisco, which means 9 hours behind, and I'm able to monitor a little bit more. Also time difference of like, you know, what happens, who posts what in Silicon Valley. Interestingly, like from my perspective, there are two main narratives. One is on the techno-solutionism side that you kind of alluded to, Kasia, where you know, like we have a problem and therefore we have a solution to it immediately. And people tend to question that less because it's tech for good or whatever kind of AI-driven solution, you know, and COVID has been very ripe to bring up these technologies. So there's that narrative that's been pushed. And, you know, I just basically look at big tech, so Facebook, Microsoft, and Google real quick. They all commend the EU for passing strict regulations, and they are ready to, you know, bow down and follow these like really tight whipping laws. So they frame it in a way that these regulations are tight. That's like my first narrative that I read. So how we say that they're loose, they're like, oof, EU is being tight on that, but okay, I'll take one for the team and I'll make an effort to. AI is so important right now. The EU acknowledges it, fundamental freedoms, blah, blah, blah. And there are systems that we have to put in place now quickly and rush. Yeah, so that's like the main two narratives that I've seen from a social media, but I mean, it happened yesterday, so it's very quick. It definitely builds on the narratives that have been pushed in Silicon Valley over the past couple of years. And the one last one, I think there's big tech's definitely focusing a lot on narrowing the conversation to bias and fairness. So following the EU regulation, they picked up a lot of the, you know, importance to have representative data sets, and all of that is like obviously super important, but kind of move the conversation away from things like business models or anything that is a little bit more like higher level than picking narrow aspects. So that's just my take on the corporate lobbying, Krzysztof. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much money in there. So whatever, there's like a couple dozen people working on civil society. You really have hundreds, actually thousands of people working on the lobbying.
Oh, that's it's hard to like take this this disproportion. Yet I'm very happy that that we want to work for it. It's like we have 4 more minutes. If there's anybody who has anything to say, I really do invite one last moment. And if not, I will give my my microphone to Krzysztof so he can do the honors of closing the discussion and maybe summarizing a bit.
Okay. Unless Vanja wanted to say, because there was a moment. No, that's fine. Okay. Yeah. So like, thank you so much. I think it's only the beginning of a journey. That's for sure. And we, you know, try to grab these first comments, and of course we were not the first to grab those comments because the internet, at least I mean my bubble, is lit with this topic so much. But the real battle began, and that's maybe I shouldn't use this war language. much, but it will be that's something pleasant, a journey, a long journey. We have a lot of time, but we don't have a lot of time at the same time. So I think it's good to get the same or similar level of knowledge, to get acquainted with the topic, and also I address it to the audience and other CSOs. I think it's super important in this regard, that at some point we join forces. I mean, it's not maybe necessary to do another formal coalition, whatever, but just to open ourselves, because as someone has said, which is quite obvious also, but important to say, the future with AI and technology is inevitable. So we'll have it, if you like it or not. I mean, there's not a moment to contest it. It will happen. What we can do is we can improve the impact it has on human beings and society. So super happy, and it was also one of the reasons we wanted to have ECLN here, because we know that they're open for increasing this capacity of NGOs and doing quite a lot. I think the Council of Europe, especially this is important for our main audience, I would say, so people from the Central and Eastern Europe, not necessarily from member states. This is the important thing. So even though you feel not prepared yet to take part in the consultation, which is important to try anyway, just like follow the process, and also maybe we'll think about something later. I mean, how we can also ask the people to contact with the governments, for example, in this regard. That might be also useful. So we will come back to the topic many times. Thank you so much for a great panel. Thank you, Vanja. Thank you, Katarzyna, in the first place. Thank you also, Marlena, for writing our chat, and everyone who is listening. Thank you, Anna, for hosting the last part. Thank you to National Endowment for Democracy for making it happen. And yes, we will publish the video. We'll let you know where the recording is, and we will keep you also updated on the next PDF-CEE talks for you who are interested also in other issues. The next one will be on the transparency of the political campaigns, including the one in internet and social media. Also, we might recommend, if you can, you're also good, Katarzyna, in pasting the links, as you can paste the link from our report that Panoptykon was leading the research project on this, and but we'll also talk it from a more CEE perspective. The next time, sign up for a newsletter. That's also important. I think Alexandra just posted also a link there. And go back, rest a bit, and prepare for the long journey with the AI regulation.
That somebody here will coordinate, I believe, and it won't be me, since you already started that effort of grouping us around that concept of campaigning together or lobbying together. I also trust, Krzysztof, that EPF will maybe not take the lead on this, but at least make sure that we have spaces to talk to, right?
Yeah,
the online spaces without the big physical space, sadly, but let's keep that loop.
Exactly. Yeah. This is super important. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you very much for super
as I'm a host
discussion.
now, I just discovered how to regain my kingdom.
Hi, everyone.
I can
superpowers. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.